everybody today. So what I wanted to do is basically go through a discussion on strategy, but take a different approach. Instead of presenting exactly how I think things should be done going forward, I instead want to take a journey. You know, we've all come a long way through this past cycle. Each of us experience it differently. And today I want to focus on the journey I've had with each of you. Now, I'm not a Bitcoin OG. I found the space way too late for that. Now, I used to think that was a strike against me, but I've since learned it helped me bring new ideas into the space. Because luckily, it's never too late to join Bitcoin. The sector I want to talk about is Bitcoin mining. And I want to share a few lessons that I've learned as an operator now that I've gone through almost an entire cycle. But before that, I want to start before I found Bitcoin. 10 years ago, I was 27 and on the precipice of a crazy journey. I wouldn't have believed you if you told me what would have unfolded over the next several years. My co-founder and I decided to work together, and we had a dream that we wanted to bring to life. We wanted to change how the world viewed energy abundance. Now, we were employee number 1 and number 2. The first dollars invested in the company were ours. In that first year, we had a small warehouse, we had meetings on folded chairs, and over the next 2 years, we managed to build a prototype, and we did so with funding raised from every friend and family we could find. Now, the movies make this stage sound glamorous, and it was exciting to build something new. But the other side of that is 2 people that hadn't been paid in over 2 years, that invested all of their life savings to make this work, working 2 jobs to pay the bills. And even now, I still joke that after we work a 12-hour day, that we've just worked half a day. In 2016, we stumbled across an amazing company. They were trying to accomplish a similar dream with energy, but they were approaching it using software as the backbone. We doubled down, we bought the company the day before they declared bankruptcy, saving the team in the process. And instead of getting easier, it got harder. We doubled down, we went into debt to keep the lights on. That year, we bet everything on the future. We put everything we owned into the company, plus some. And in December 2018, we had $3,000 in the bank account and no way to pay the bills the next week. An investment bank had just walked away from a promising funding 5 days before Christmas. But if you know me, you know the thing that I hate more than anything is losing. And I was not going to lose this one. Rather than throwing in the towel, we worked through the holidays, and without an investment bank, we found the funding needed. And on New Year's Day, the funding we needed hit the account. It was our first large funding round. Over the next 2 years, the tide started to shift. We even got to take a paycheck that we didn't have to reinvest. We built the company into a $10 million per year energy management business, and we acquired 4 companies along the way. And we even survived a hostile takeover attempt in 2019. Now, in that time, we built ourselves into a microgrid business, which means we were managing building and campus energy systems specifically to maximize energy value and savings. This involved batteries paired with generators, solar panels, and other assets. And then when everything looked in the clear, this little thing called a pandemic came along. And I had no idea the perspective it would bring. 1 month before everything shut down, I flew to Georgia to visit a data center to talk about energy efficiency tools we could offer. And I met one of the most interesting groups of people I'd run into in a long time. And this is where my Bitcoin journey started. Since then, we've raised over $500 million. We built one of the largest Bitcoin mining companies in the world. Now, I'm not telling you to take a victory lap, but instead I'm doing it so we have background for where I came from, because it's important. The lessons learned on the first half of this journey before I ever discovered Bitcoin have shaped how I view the world and the strategy that I employed to shape the company and how we mine. Standing here today, I can say we've become a success. We became a success not only because of what we did, but because of what we didn't do. The things you don't do matter just as much as the projects you pursue. And the reason behind these decisions is what's special about the CleanSpark way. First, it's important to be clear. I didn't walk into that data center seeking any answers or seeking Bitcoin, but I did walk into a building was with an open mind and a mind always seeking new opportunities. When I first walked into the data center, I was actually a casual Bitcoin skeptic, and I probably would have remained a skeptic, mostly because I'd never gone down the rabbit hole. I walked in thinking this was a traditional data center, but as I pulled up, there was a hum in the air, and that was the first indication I was walking into something different. As I toured the facility, I was surprised to be blasted by a wall of hot air as we went from section to section, and as we went outside, they had these stacked air-cooled pods all together, and they'd also taken the interior of a perfectly good data center and modified it in a way that no sane data center operator would. By the end of the tour, I was more than intrigued, but I also didn't see how any of this resulted in a viable business. But what really caught my attention was there was something different about the group of people. I came to find out the founder of the data center had died unexpectedly, and a customer who was hosting miners had stepped in to run the facility while the estate was being settled. And well, that raised a lot of questions. What impressed me was that the employees stayed. They could have left. They stayed because they were involved in something special. The attitude is something I connected with. A group of people that were taking risks to continue doing what they believed to be important. A group that pulled together when the going got tough. My curiosity was officially piqued. What were they doing that after an untimely death would cause a customer to step in, to do the work, the employees to stay, and both of them with no guarantees that any of it would work out? Now I sat in the conference room with the customer that had taken over. Bernardo Schuchman, who I later came to find out was one of the most prolific Bitcoin miners of all times. He may have personally overseen more Bitcoin mined than anyone in the world. He proceeded to tell me with almost religious zeal about Bitcoin and what it meant to him. Now, we each have our own Bitcoin conversion stories, and that's where mine started. I left that day with my head spinning. When I walked out, I could have stayed curious, could have learned a little, and even personally bought in. But as I said, the pandemic created a unique opportunity for perspective. Little did I know I would be afforded the opportunity, whether I like it or not, to sit and study Bitcoin for the next several months. For me, the light bulb moment was Bitcoin's relationship to energy. And I came to believe that the best and highest use of energy was for Bitcoin. Bitcoin also, in my opinion, is the best human invention to convert energy into value. Now, I couldn't have taken this journey without an open mind, curiosity, and willingness to be nimble when the opportunity appeared before me. Of course, converting yourself is one thing, and converting someone else is quite another. The next leg of my journey would be my first attempt at orange pilling a group of people. And I didn't set the bar low. I started with my board of directors. For perspective, I was 34, we're a public company, we're on NASDAQ, and yes, my board looked like what you'd expect. Let's just say, at the time, there was a fair amount of gray hair. I'd been doing all right since taking over the company as president and then CEO seat. We doubled the company's revenue each year for 3 consecutive years. And this revenue, of course, had nothing to do with Bitcoin. But I'd reached a crossroads. I'd reached a conclusion that not only was Bitcoin good for the world, but that was a path that would be best for myself and the company I had built and was leading. And as much as I make fun of the gray hair that was on the board and in the room that day, it was a board that contained wisdom, insight, and perspective. In the industry, we have an age line, and we often talk about this age line. It's apparent. And as I prepared to open the conversation, I knew that ideology and my belief in Bitcoin wouldn't be the thing that would prevail, but rather logic, reason, and patience would need to be employed. But most importantly, I knew I needed them to see that Bitcoin was the better path to reaching our vision of an abundant energy future. My first strategy was to find and bring an ally to battle. I spent several weeks with my co-founder and chairman, walked him down the path, and we were able to then approach the board on a joint front. This is where patience comes in. We all know that orange pilling is not a conversation that fits into a single board meeting. Instead, it was going to take hours and hours of sidebar conversations. It became clear that to fully orange pill the board, it could take years. At the time, I felt a sense of urgency. The halving had recently occurred. The Bitcoin cycle, to me, felt ready to rocket. So we formalized a plan, and we agreed to it. We would buy the data center, we would pursue Bitcoin mining, but we would also continue the energy business. Now, ultimately, we ended up selling the energy business and going all in a little over a year later. But in that time, each member of the board was able to have their own Bitcoin journey. Each of their journeys is also unique, and it required us as a team to establish a thoughtful space where ideas were free to be debated, challenged, and refined. Now, by employing this strategy through today, it's led to the board providing me with broad trust and support that's allowed me to aggressively build the company to its current scale. These values, wisdom, insight, and perspective led us to be one of the most innovative miners in the space. While we were still working on expanding our first site, we started looking for what was next. Because just a year into our journey, it was suddenly like the gold rush. Everybody wanted to be a Bitcoin miner. Went from a few names on NASDAQ to over 25. And our unique approach and background in energy, it was proving its worth. But we knew that we needed to continue to grow in order to be relevant as a public mining at this point in the cycle. Now, we found a site that checked most of the boxes in Norcross, Georgia. Now, although it was a location that didn't seem obvious, the type of location that was just mentioned in the prior panel. It was sitting in the middle of a community, and it was surrounded by housing. It was an old Sprint Nextel data center that had been mothballed for years. Now, it was one of those places, it looked like what you would expect. There were still whiteboard messages on the wall, there were lunches in the fridge. It actually was a little creepy because it looked like everybody had walked out from their sitting position 3 years before. The only difference from when they walked out was the mildew smell. It took a lot to see a vision of its potential, and it didn't come to us automatically because we knew a noisy, air-cooled data center would not be a good fit in that community. So, before we did anything, we sat down with the community development leaders in the county. This is what we refer to as walking in the front door, and we do this in every community that we start with. We shared a vision for a data center. It would incorporate immersion cooling, and this would allow us to operate quietly. Now, we were pleasantly surprised by the response. I actually remember the fire marshal from the community commenting that he drove by the building every day on the way to work, and he'd been hoping for years that somebody would revitalize the location. This community engagement became critical as we innovated a new solution that was new to both us and the community. They worked with us hand in hand as we found the best path to renovate the building to bring the highest value to the area. Specifically, that fire marshal had to then learn how to do fire suppression for immersion cooling in the best way that made sense for both of us. Couldn't have done that without working together. Now, immersion cooling is something that's often talked about, but not often executed upon. It's more expensive to build than air-cooled, and dealing with fluids comes with completely different consequences versus air. We learned all we could before we launched into the project, but we also wanted to size it in a way that would be big enough to provide the value needed, but we wanted it to be small enough that we could learn from any mistakes or insights gained. We announced the 20 megawatt project not long after one of our peers announced a 200 megawatt immersion project. But we wanted to take it a step further. We decided to build the project in 2 phases, even though it would take longer. The first being 8 megawatts, the second being 12. This would allow us to benefit from insights gained during that first phase. For perspective, we designed the first section to be highly efficient, of course. But we learned enough that with a few changes, such as removing a couple bends in the pipes, keeping them above ground, and we gained even more efficiency in the second phase. Now, although incremental, we wanted to make sure that this was a site that would have enough efficiency, that we could dunk the machines, and they would live well beyond the next halving, because that's where the real test would begin. Now, this path, it went against trends at the time. One, public companies were only seeking and announcing these giant super sites. And two, everybody was still using air-cooled for the most part. Bigger and faster is not always better, especially when launching something for the first time. Mistakes are better experienced at small scale, and innovation goes smoother when you can take your time. Building within a community like we did in the town of Norcross, Georgia, prepared me for one of the most transformational builds of my career. It was a large site in a small rural community in Georgia. As we moved into next year, we continued to be community focused, and this focus became ever more important as the winds started to shift. We sensed that bumps were coming. We sensed that the market was behaving irrationally. And when we did something that was highly unpopular, but it served us incredibly well. We decided that we should start selling Bitcoin to fund the company versus seeking debt. We made this decision because we felt the market was peaking. But more importantly, we felt we wanted to pay the bills with the cash flow we produced. Now, this seems very obvious for most businesses, but we all know the ideology of holding on for dear life and how that can influence how we behave. But we knew we owed it to the communities we operated in to take a conservative approach at this stage of the cycle. Now, unfortunately, Bitcoin continued to drop week over week and month over month. And while it dropped, we saw our balance sheet continue to strengthen during a tough period of the market. Now, this all culminated as we continued to seek growth opportunities. Assets were getting cheaper every day, and our conservative approach was serving us well. We even started to notice that we were the only buyer of these assets when calls started coming in to us. Now, a miner in the city of Washington, Georgia, was interested in selling. They called us, then they'd built a great site. But unfortunately, they'd encountered some financial trouble. As we dug in, we liked the site more every day. But things really came to a head when we found out in this little town of 4,000 citizens, which acted as its own utility, was also owed a very substantial sum on their power bill. The company didn't have the means to make the payment, and the little town did not have the financial wherewithal or means to make it without this payment. That changed our view completely on the transaction. And it changed because if you've ever been to Georgia, you know that trust, when it's shared, a handshake is treated as well as a contract. We realized that a miner defaulting on a payment would hinder the reputation and progress our efforts and others were making throughout the state of Georgia. This put us in a position where we realized that we needed to protect the reputation of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin mining community. The good thing was the site was also excellent. We were able to come to terms with the miner that allowed them to live to fight another day. They were able to keep mining at another site they owned. But we also saved the community from financial ruin and allowed the industry to keep its word at the same time. Fast forward to today. We have more than doubled the size of the site. And the city budget has increased by more than double, allowing the city to improve its schools, roads, and infrastructure. And this doubling was a direct result of Bitcoin mining. This is the dream we talk about when Bitcoin mining comes to communities. Now, when we go into town, if someone is wearing a CleanSpark shirt, it's hard to pay for lunch without somebody else picking up the check for you. Bitcoin mining is loved in the community, and I shudder to think what would happen if it gone differently. Doing the right thing for everyone involved and staying community-focused as a point of strategy had paid us back in dividends again. What we did for one small town is the future of Bitcoin mining across the United States. Now I'm going to talk about where I think the industry is heading. As people come to realize the advantages of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining simultaneously, I believe we're going to see increased capital flows in the industry. It's been a very common point that we've talked about. I believe this is going to occur with multiple events. And I want to address one in particular that some miners are talking about with doom and gloom versus optimism. I want to address one thing first. I, for one, believe in the 4-year cycle. I am highly optimistic about its potential effect. While I do think it will take a few months post-halving for the cycle to trigger any sort of move to the next level, I think it will. And I think that Bitcoin holders and Bitcoin miners that are well positioned at the time are going to benefit significantly. Yes, I said holders. And as you recall, I mentioned earlier, we are sellers. We are, but we are also accumulating. We actually took a change of approach in that strategy over the last several months, and we have really boosted our HODL balance. We just aren't trying to be the largest, just to be the largest. But instead, I believe, as an industry, we are best served taking a dollar cost average approach to maximizing the value of the Bitcoin that we hold. We have a duty as a public company to shareholders, but more importantly, we have a duty as miners, each of us, to the communities that we operate in. Now back to halving. I think this upcoming halving is going to be one of the most interesting. That is because of the pending ETFs that I think will proceed prior to the halving. What we need to recognize is this will be a floodgate of new capital. For each of us in this room, it feels like Bitcoin has come a long way. But if we step back and we look around, I think we're going to find that we just left the starting blocks. These ETFs will also provide a stamp of approval to industries connected to Bitcoin. And yes, I mean the miners. But I think that the opportunities are going to be a shift. It's going to be a shift of quality over quantity, a shift from headlines to actual production. Preparing for halving needed to have been done yesterday. There's likely no room left for a miner that's thinking about it today. Now, this two-stage effect between ETFs and halving over a short period of time, I believe will have the ability to move Bitcoin to a new level of adoption. And I don't just mean the value of Bitcoin, but I mean the acceptance of Bitcoin. Just imagine the next time you see your uncle at that holiday dinner, instead of being a skeptic, he actually wants to know about Bitcoin. And he wants to know about it because his financial advisor just told him to put a little bit of his money into an ETF so that he can get exposure, in the same sentence that he told him to do it with gold. Now, when he asks you that question, all of you will successfully orange pill him, of course, and then he's more likely to buy a little directly, maybe even get a hardware wallet and manage his Bitcoin himself. This adoption, I think, will be the next springboard that Bitcoin mining needs. After nearly 10 years in the energy management business, with 4 of those in Bitcoin mining, it's clear to me, and I think many of us, that Bitcoin mining is going to be an integral part of grids. But just because it's clear to you and to me, it does not mean it's clear to utility executives. In fact, we are far from it. The average utility executive hears risk when they consider Bitcoin mining. And if they don't, you can be sure that their board does. We need Bitcoin mining to reach the next level in traditional finance to overcome these doubts. Utilities are still concerned most about the scenarios where miners can't pay the bills if Bitcoin goes down. And that doesn't leave any room for innovation between the two of us. But I see a future where we overcome these hurdles, gained the trust required. When that happens, I think we'll see a reversal of what appears to be a current trend. This is a trend of supersites that are highly centralized. I see a future that moves towards continued increased decentralization as more small mines are built and interspersed across the grid to offer important balancing measures. This strategy becomes one of saturation, where grids are full of 2 to 10 megawatt sites that allow a utility and miners to work together to not only balance large sections of the macro grid, think statewide and what's happening in Texas, but to better balance grids within grids. If every substation or neighborhood had a small miner to give and take power from, wasted energy would decrease and rates would decrease for all ratepayers. To be clear, I don't see utilities becoming miners just yet. They have capped profit margins when you understand the regulations, and the other regulations they have to abide by would make this incredibly difficult. But instead of them investing in a battery bank that generally proves to be less than 80% efficient, they will seek out Bitcoin mining partners that will allow them the benefits without the heightened risk. This fulfills the oldest business strategy of all time: find a need and meet it. Now, mining has discovered and is filling these unique needs. Had our industry taken a strictly ideological approach and avoided traditional finance, we might never have found mining's big grid benefits, because it's going to take big dollars, and those big dollars are coming. Bitcoin has a strong ideological pull. It's what attracts many of us. A new monetary order. That's what we're here for. And that's an incredible thing to contemplate. And within this movement is Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining is simply a nascent industry within this ideological movement. And to achieve the goals of Bitcoin, we as an industry need to choose strategy over ideology as an industry. I've learned a lot going through this Bitcoin cycle. I've learned the value of an open mind, the benefits of intergenerational wisdom, the important role of community, and most importantly, the value of being strategic while having a vision for what's to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.